The rain hadn't stopped since morning. It was the kind of rain that felt personal, soft, cold, and relentless, as if the sky itself was mourning with me. The church was packed with faces I barely recognized, people murmuring prayers, whispering condolences that didn't mean a thing. My father's coffin sat at the front, draped in white lilies, his favorite. I stood there, numb, trying to feel something, anything, but all I felt was confusion. My father was a complicated man. To most, he was charming, respected, even adored. To me, he was distant, always half there, half somewhere else. I told myself it was work, that he loved me, even if he wasn't good at showing it. But as I looked around the room that day, something inside me shifted. Because I saw her. A woman, standing near the back, dressed in black like everyone else, but there was something different about her. Her hands trembled as she held a single white rose. Her eyes weren't just sad, they were shattered, and beside her was a young man. Maybe 19 or 20. Broad shoulders, neat hair, and a face that, for a moment, stole the air from my lungs. Because he looked just like my father, the same jawline, the same calm, distant stare. I told myself it was a coincidence. That grief was making me see things that weren't there. But then, I noticed the way she looked at the coffin. Not like a friend, not like a distant acquaintance. It was deeper, rawer, as if she'd lost a part of herself too. When the service ended, people began leaving, one by one. I stood frozen watching her. And then she looked up, directly at me. Our eyes met for barely a second, but in that single glance, something passed between us. Recognition, fear, guilt. She turned away quickly, guiding the young man out before I could say a word. But it was too late. The image of them burned into my mind. As I stood there in the rain, watching her disappear down the church steps, I felt a chill run through me. Something told me. This funeral wasn't just the end of my father's life. It was the beginning of uncovering his biggest secret. I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her, the woman in black, and the young man who looked like my father's reflection 20 years younger. Who were they? Why were they there? And why did her eyes hold that kind of grief, the kind that only love could leave behind? By morning, I'd made up my mind. I needed to know. The next day, I drove to the small cafe across from the church. It was quiet, empty, except for the soft hum of a coffee machine. I didn't know what I was looking for. Maybe closure, maybe answers. And then, just as I was about to leave, I saw them again. The woman and the boy, sitting by the window. She was staring out, lost in thought, while he scrolled on his phone. They didn't notice me, not at first. I walked closer, my heartbeat echoing in my ears. "Excuse me," I said softly. She turned. Her face went pale. "You were at the funeral," I continued. "Yes," she whispered. Her voice was delicate, trembling. "He was important to us." Us. The word hung heavy in the air. The young man looked up, curious. "You knew my dad?" he asked. Dad. For a moment, my world stopped. The room spun, my breath caught in my throat. I stared at him, those eyes, that voice. And in that instant, I knew. He wasn't lying. The woman quickly reached for his hand, as if to silence him. "Not now, please," she murmured. I swallowed hard. "I'm sorry for your loss," I managed to say before walking out. My legs felt weak, my hands shaking as I reached the car. Behind me, I could feel her gaze, heavy, filled with something she wasn't ready to admit. That night I sat in my father's study, surrounded by the smell of his old books and expensive cologne. I looked at his photo, smiling, proud, untouchable. And then, I whispered, "Who were they, Dad?" The silence of the house answered me, but deep down, I already knew. This wasn't over. Something told me. My father's secrets were only just beginning to surface. The next morning, I woke up with a single thought pounding in my head. Find the truth. I didn't care how ugly it was, I just needed to know what my father had hidden from me all those years. I started with his office, the one room in the house he'd always kept locked when I was a kid. Now it was mine to open. The air inside smelled of dust and secrets. His desk was spotless, his files neatly stacked, everything in perfect order. Too perfect. My father wasn't just organized, he was deliberate. Every drawer told a story. I began pulling them open one by one. Old business contracts, letters, tax papers, the usual. But at the very bottom drawer, beneath a stack of unused envelopes, I found it. A small, faded folder labeled simply, Personal. Inside were bank statements, transfers made every month to the same name, Clara Dawson. My pulse quickened. The name sounded familiar. It took me a second to remember. The woman from the funeral. Why was my father sending her money for over 20 years? Then I found a letter, dated back 15 years. His handwriting was unmistakable. Clara, I'm sorry I can't be there as often as I should. You and Luke mean the world to me. I just need to protect them from finding out before it's time. Luke. The name hit me like a storm. The boy from the funeral, the one who'd called him Dad. My hands trembled as I read the letter again. My father wasn't just helping this woman. He was supporting a second family, one I never knew existed. I sank into his chair, staring at the letter. Images of my childhood flashed before me. The late-night business trips, the quiet phone calls behind closed doors, the birthdays he missed. All this time, I'd thought he was working to build a future for us, but maybe he was building one for them. I folded the letter, my throat tightening. He'd lied to us, to my mother, to me. And now I couldn't stop wondering if he hid this for decades. What else was buried beneath his perfect image? I couldn't keep it to myself any longer. The truth was too heavy, burning in my chest every time I looked at my mother. She deserved to know, even if it shattered her. That evening, I found her sitting in the living room, staring at the empty chair where my father used to read his newspaper. Her eyes were distant, her voice quiet when she said, "He always promised he'd never leave me." I swallowed hard. "Mom, there's something I need to tell you." She turned slowly, her face pale but patient. I handed her the letter, the one addressed to Clara. She read it once, then again. Her fingers began to shake. "Clara Dawson?" she whispered. "That name sounds familiar." "She was at the funeral," I said, "with a young man named Luke." For a moment, the room fell completely silent. Then my mother's expression changed, a flicker of pain, then realization. "He told me he had to travel for business every few weeks. I believed him." Her voice cracked. "All those years, I believed him." Tears welled in her eyes, but she forced a bitter laugh. "He made me feel guilty for doubting him, said I was being paranoid." I felt my stomach twist. "He lied to both of us." She nodded slowly, holding the letter close to her chest. "And you know the worst part?" she said through trembling lips. "I think a part of me always knew. I just didn't want it to be true." Her words sank into me like stones. I wanted to comfort her, to tell her it wasn't her fault. But I couldn't. Because deep down, I was angry too. Angry at him for betraying her. Angry at myself for still missing him. That night, I sat outside on the porch, staring at the rain-soaked garden. The truth had broken everything I'd believed about my family. My father wasn't the hero I'd made him out to be. He was a liar. A coward. And yet part of me still craved answers. Why Clara? Why Luke? If he loved us so much, why did he choose them too? I didn't know it yet, but the deeper I searched for those answers, the darker the truth would become. I told myself I just wanted closure. That seeing her again, seeing them, would help me move on. But deep down, I knew it wasn't just curiosity anymore. It was something darker. I needed to understand why my father had chosen them, what they had that we didn't. So one gray afternoon, I drove to the address I found on one of the bank slips. A quiet neighborhood, peaceful, ordinary. Their house sat at the end of the street, small but warm, with flowers blooming in the yard. It looked like the kind of home my father had always said he wanted when I was a kid. Simple, honest, happy. I parked across the street and watched. The curtains fluttered open. Clara stepped out holding a mug of coffee. She looked older than at the funeral. Or maybe just exhausted from years of secrets. A few seconds later, the door opened again, and Luke appeared. He was laughing. Laughing the same way my father used to. Something in me cracked. He knelt by the garden, fixing something, while Clara handed him a screwdriver. They looked so natural, so familiar, like a family that had never been broken. I realized then, my father hadn't just visited them. He'd lived with them, loved them. Through the window, I saw a photo on the wall. My father standing beside them, his hand on Luke's shoulder, smiling. That same gentle, proud smile I hadn't seen in years. I wanted to storm in, demand answers. But instead, I just stood there, frozen. When Luke turned toward the window, our eyes met for a second. I ducked behind the car, heart pounding. He hadn't seen me. Or maybe he had. I drove away, my hands trembling on the steering wheel. My mind spun with questions. How long had this been going on? Did everyone else know except us? By the time I got home, my anger had turned to something else. A quiet, cold resolve. If my father had built two lives, then I would make sure both of them knew exactly what that felt like. This wasn't about curiosity anymore, it was about justice. That night, I sat in my father's study again, staring at the photo on his desk, the one of our family. Me, him, and Mom, smiling. Perfect. A lie captured in a frame. My reflection stared back from the glass, but I barely recognized myself. The warmth was gone. What replaced it was something colder, sharper, the need to make things right. If my father could hide a family from us, then I would make sure his secrets didn't die with him. I began by going through his safe, the one hidden behind his bookshelf. I'd seen him open it once when I was younger. After a few failed guesses, the code clicked. My birthday. The irony stung. Inside, I found his will. Thick, neatly sealed, waiting for the lawyer's reading next week. My heart raced as I flipped through the first few pages. And there it was. Luke Dawson listed under beneficiaries. My father had left him a share, not just a token amount, nearly half. My breath caught. He'd prepared everything, down to the last cent. He didn't just care for them. He planned for them. I clenched the papers in my hands, my mind spinning. For years, I thought my father's distance was because of work stress, but he was building a future for someone else, another son, another family. The betrayal burned deeper now, no longer just emotional. It was tangible. Money, property, legacy. That's when I made my decision. I wasn't going to sit quietly while the world remembered him as a good man. I would expose every lie, every hidden truth, not just to my mother, but to everyone who thought he was a saint. I called the lawyer the next morning, confirming the date of the will reading. My tone was calm, polite, but inside I was counting down the days. Every smile, every condolence, every word of pity I'd received since the funeral. I'd carry them all to that meeting. And when the time came, I'd drop the truth like a bomb. Because if my father could live two lives, then I could make sure both of them ended in the same explosion. The lawyer's office smelled like polished wood and nervous cologne. Family. Members filled the chairs, faces I recognized and faces I didn't. My mother sat stiffly beside me, clutching a handkerchief like it was a lifeline. Everyone wore their best sadness. It felt like a theater where no one wanted to be an actor, but everyone was forced to play a part. The lawyer cleared his throat, opened the thick envelope, and began. He read the usual formal lines: possessions, properties, accounts. My stomach tightened with each clause, waiting for the part that would change everything. And to Luke Dawson, son of Clara Dawson, the lawyer said without inflection. I bequeath 50% of my estate. The words landed like a thunderclap. A hush fell. My mother's hand went cold in mine. I watched heads turn toward the back of the room as if expecting someone else to explain it away. The air tasted metallic, as if the room itself was bleeding disbelief. Clara's name echoed in my ears. A cousin hissed. An aunt whispered a curse. Then something inside me, a furnace that had been fed by months of betrayal, by late nights in my father's study, ignited. I stood. I have something to say, I announced, my voice steadier than I felt. All eyes snapped to me. My mother stared like I'd become a stranger. I laid the letter on the table, watched the lawyer's eyes scan the lines I'd unearthed from Dad's private drawer. He wrote to her, I said, for 15 years. Payments, visits, a whole life. Silence turned to a roar. Questions flew, accusations landed. Clara, who had stayed at the back, now stood pale, her face drained of color. Luke's eyes were wide, hurt and confused, as if the ground beneath him had been pulled away. You kept this from us, my mother whispered, the word you a knife aimed at a man who was no longer here to answer. All those years? Why? I wanted to feel triumphant, to enjoy the collapse I'd engineered. Instead, a strange emptiness hollowed me out. Watching my mother crumble didn't fix the ruin inside me. Watching Luke stare at his father's name on the paper didn't make the late nights any less hollow. We had exposed the secret. The family line had split open, but the victory I'd imagined felt small against the wreckage. The silence after the storm was worse than the shouting. The will had been read, the truth had detonated, and now all that was left were broken pieces of two families, both pretending they didn't bleed. My mother stopped speaking to almost everyone, including me. She said she needed time, but her eyes told a different story. They said I'd taken the little dignity she had left and thrown it into the fire. For days, the house felt colder. My father's portrait was gone from the living room wall. The curtains stayed closed. Even the air felt heavy, thick with unspoken words. I thought exposing him would bring peace, maybe even justice. Instead, it brought silence, regret, guilt. One afternoon, I found an envelope on my doorstep. No return address. Inside was a folded letter, the handwriting instantly familiar. My father's. The date was just a few weeks before he passed. If you're reading this, I probably didn't get the chance to explain. I made mistakes. I loved you and your mother more than you'll ever know. But I also loved them. Not in the same way, but enough to take care of them. I never wanted you to find out like this. Luke is your brother. He has a good heart. Please don't hate him for my sins. I've already paid enough for them in silence. My hands trembled. For the first time, I felt something other than anger. Something close to sorrow. I sat there on the porch, the letter clutched in my fingers, the world spinning slowly around me. Everything I'd done, the exposure, the humiliation, had been for revenge. But reading his words, I realized he wasn't protecting himself. He was protecting us from each other. The phone buzzed beside me, a message from an unknown number. It's Luke. Can we talk? I stared at the screen for a long time. My instinct said no. My guilt said yes. Maybe the only way to bury this pain was to face the one person who'd lost just as much as I had, because in the end, we were both victims of the same man's lies. A week passed before I replied to Luke's message. Every day I typed something, then deleted it. What could I even say? Hey, sorry I exposed your entire existence in front of everyone. There were no words big enough for that kind of damage. But in the end, silence felt worse than guilt. So I finally wrote back, let's meet. We chose the cemetery, neutral ground. The day was overcast, the wind cool and soft, the sky still heavy with secrets. I saw him standing there before I reached the gate, hands in his pockets, head bowed. He looked older than I remembered, not in years, but in the way pain matures a person too soon. When he looked up, our eyes met. There was no hate there, just exhaustion. I didn't come to fight, he said quietly. Neither did I replied. For a long moment, we just stood in silence, staring at the headstone that bore our father's name. "I used to think he was perfect," Luke said. "The kind of man every kid wishes they had. Now I don't even know who he was." I swallowed hard. "You're not alone. I thought I knew him too. Turns out I didn't know anything." He nodded slowly. "He told me about you once. Said you were strong, like him." I guess he wasn't wrong. The words caught me off guard. For the first time in months, the anger inside me softened. We stood there a while longer. Then I pulled the old letter from my jacket, the one my father wrote before he died. I placed it gently on the grave. "He wanted peace," I said. "Even if he didn't deserve it." Luke took a deep breath. "Then maybe we should give him that." For the first time, I saw a faint smile cross his face. Small, uncertain, but real. As we left the cemetery side by side, but still strangers in so many ways, I realized something. Revenge had filled me with purpose, but forgiveness was what finally made me breathe again. Maybe my father broke two families. But standing there, with Luke, I understood. We didn't have to stay broken forever. Time has a strange way of softening even the sharpest memories. Months passed since that day at the cemetery, and while the pain didn't vanish, it stopped burning. It became a quiet ache, the kind that reminds you where you've been, but doesn't control where you're going. I visited my mother more often. She still didn't talk much about my father, but there was less bitterness in her eyes now. Sometimes I'd catch her looking at old photos, not with anger, but with a sad kind of acceptance. Maybe she was realizing, like I had, that hating the dead doesn't hurt them. It only chains you to their mistakes. As for Luke, we didn't become instant family. Forgiveness isn't that easy. But slowly we began to talk. Sometimes we'd meet for coffee or share memories about the man who had broken both our hearts in different ways. We didn't need to like him to acknowledge the truth. He was our father. And no amount of denial could change that. One evening, as the sun set behind the city skyline, I found myself thinking about everything that had happened. The lies, the anger, the revenge, and the strange peace that followed. I used to believe revenge would bring justice, that exposing the truth would finally make me feel free. But I learned that revenge doesn't heal. It only spreads the same pain you're trying to escape. The real power lies in forgiveness, not because the other person deserves it, but because you deserve peace. My father's choices destroyed a lot, but they also revealed something I never would have seen otherwise: strength. My mother's quiet endurance, Luke's kindness despite betrayal, and my own ability to rise even when everything I believed in had fallen apart. As I walked away from the cemetery one last time, I looked up at the sky and whispered, "I forgive you." Not for him. Not to erase what he did, but for me, so I could finally stop carrying the weight of his sins. Because sometimes the truth doesn't set you free right away. It just shows you the chains you've been wearing. And forgiveness. That's the only key that truly unlocks them.